okay, or it never comes to anything, those odds are about 50 to 60%. Now bear in mind, if you're the world's 100th best tennis player, you're a fucking good tennis player, but you're living out of your car. It's only the top 10 people who make any money, right? Now, this becomes worse because I would argue, if you really enjoy the sport, do it for its own sake, that's fine. If you have a massive innate talent like Usain Bolt or Tiger Woods, do it because you find it easy. If you're one of those incredibly rare people, it's probably worth doing, okay? But it's not even as good as it was 30 years ago. When John McEnroe started playing on the seniors tour, the other young tennis players said to him, John, when you're winning Wimbledon and all that stuff, what do you do to keep fit? And John McEnroe said, well, I play tennis. Yeah, but obviously you play tennis, but what else do you do? Weight? You do have Pilates, spin classes, right? No, I just play tennis. And when I got sick of playing tennis, I just stopped playing tennis. And they looked at him as if he was completely insane, because you cannot play tennis at the top level now unless you devote your entire life. Now, the 1972 Brazil team, okay, or 1974 Brazil team, they came off the pitch at half time, they lit cigarettes, right? You could be Paul Gascoigne, you could be Puskás, you could play football at the top level and be a bit of a lard ass if you had enough talent, okay? You can't do that anymore. So maybe it's not worth trying. Just saying, I think it's really depressing statistical pay on organised sport. The only exception is golf, by the way, which is so rich, you can make a reasonable amount of money being quite a good golfer, because it's so rich. Everything else, total winner takes all. Anyway, okay, worrying fact, I'm very quick here. Big businesses suffer with toxoplasmosis, technoplasmosis, and metrical benchmarking disease much more because they're incapable of being eccentric. Because in a large publicly run business, everything you do has to be justifiable logically in advance, which completely limits the number of things you can do, which also makes you very easy to compete. Okay? Family-run businesses, founder-led businesses, nearly all the good businesses now, if you look at the UK, are either family-owned or they're founder-run. Okay, there are a few good PLCs, not very many. These are the 5 winners of 2024 Advertising Effectiveness Award. 4 of them okay, Specsavers, Yorkshire Tea, Raceway. Guinness is kind of run like a family-owned business. I would argue that actually large publicly run companies which are entirely installed for quarterly reporting and where the national people are turning across the chief financial officer, I think they're incapable of doing that anymore. I think it's a waste of time. Most really interesting businesses, I think, you find out they're either founder-run, Octopus Energy, Enterprise, Dyson, Jaguar Land Rover, JCB, okay? All the really interesting businesses that actually do shit are actually privately owned, family run, or they've got a founder like Greg Jackson Octopus, who's really interesting. If anybody's wondering what the hell the picture on the left is, it's T-Bay Services. Anybody stayed there? Lots of services? It's like an order of magnitude better than any other service station. Why? Because it's a family, a local family that founded it, not some tedious corporation or a bunch of wankers from private equity who'll basically fuck the whole thing up in 5 years anyway. Okay? I mean, this is literally, it's a kind of Soviet-style capitalism we're living in, where your financial metrics, which you use to justify your own existence, are the primary product, not serving the customer. Okay? It's total bullshit. Anyway, I've got to stop. Everybody wants coffee? Big text will go there. Disneyland meets the gas station. Once again, family-owned. AO, John Roberts, they give away bears. You could never do that. Okay, imagine if you tried to do that within a public limited company. Can you give me a business case as to what the ROI would be on giving a bear to a child? Okay? And then okay, how can you prove that a bear is more successful than another animal? For example, a sloth or an aardvark. Okay? It's impossible to have a nice idea in a large organisation because the self-justification is basically have a right to veto over everything. Okay? And we end up working to their metrics, their council. I'm going to skip all this because you've heard it before. 2 tips. One thing that's massively underrated and underused in the digital world is quality of writing. Amazon is a copywriting fucking disaster. Okay? You go to the product, you think, I quite like this. Ooh, it's got USB-C, right? If I see anything with USB-C, so there you go. My real terror is they bring out USB-D, in which case I'll be bankrupt because I have to replace every single thing I own. Anyway, sorry about that. Quality copywriting is totally underrated in this business. I've seen an example there in an online retailer simply improving the quality of the body copy describing the product, literally improved things by, I think the conversion rate went up by like 4%. Okay? Because someone bothered to write a nice emotional description rather than just specification. Okay, right? Quality writing is totally underrated. AI now provides you with I think not too good. Just start with something pretty good and then use a human to make it much better. But my final tip is go out and go back to the business and say, okay, we've got all these compare ourselves with the world. Some of them are probably doing very much they do. Let's have a few months of tomorrow. And there's a guy who runs this little transport service in Texas, and he said, well, I'm working on this and this and this, it's all about competitors, but if a real bit of electric vehicle runs this 6 weeks, sort of one like should I have another metric? And I said, okay, the number of times the passengers you are on board. Because they've got a little clicker that the driver has, and just click the clicker every time someone laughs. Because that's what makes the difference in the bus. Right? You pursue, in other words, that stops you becoming yet another vulture by following exactly the same criteria as everybody else. What we're doing is we're massively reducing biodiversity in the workspace because everybody's pursuing the same metrics to express exactly the same stuff, to have exactly the same, or rather, yeah, it's not actually the investors and the owners, it's actually the intermediaries who have exactly the same objectives as each other. And what it's doing is creating a bit like the Olympics, it's hyper competition. What we should be doing is creating new games rather than producing at the existing. And then my final little tip, as I said, rather than trying to change the world, change how people see the world, because when they see the world differently, they behave differently, which then changes the world. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I keep hearing people saying, you will say to your AI, find me a skiing holiday, and it will provide you with a perfect skiing holiday. But I keep saying, people don't decide like that. When you allow tech pros too much power over decision-making, along with their running dog lackeys in kind of management consultancy, you're optimizing for something which may be very, very distant from what your real-world customers really care about.
What makes Dyson so effective at advertising?
Actually, it's not advertising, it's marketing, and it's customer experience.
What's the difference between marketing and advertising?
Advertising is a subordinate part of marketing, and
Do you think we're looking for efficiency in the wrong place?
you usually do. And so you focus too heavily on cost reduction and too little on value creation.
What are the rules of good copy? If I asked you to teach me how to write good copy, how would you do it?
I think a large part of it comes down to
So we were talking about this in the elevator. It was 9 years ago. Back when podcasting wasn't even a thing.
you must be able to dig out the original content, presumably.
Yeah.
What was it? It was your podcast number 47 or something, was it?
Oh no, I think it was like 16 or
16, really?
It was really low. We'll have to dig out the number, but it's been a long time since that.
Oh, fabulous.
And podcasting is
So I've been following Simon's Creed devotedly, and it's always interesting. Very, very interesting. And I mean, the whole question of the decision sciences is, I think, at the moment, completely different. And actually, by the way, it'll be very, very interesting with AI. Because I keep hearing people saying, you will say to your AI, find me a skiing holiday, and it will provide you with a perfect skiing holiday. But I keep saying, people don't decide like that. At the very least, you'll have to show them 3 or 4 or 5 skiing holidays from which they choose. Because we can't really choose in the absence of comparison. Do you see what I mean? It's a basic element of free market capitalism, which is we can only like something if we choose it in preference to something else.
That's interesting. How does that relate to like a travel agency, which would do that inherently? Like if you said, I'm going to India to chat GPT and you're like, plan it for me, versus you go to a travel agency and you're like, I'm going to India, plan it for me.
Well, among real estate agents, there's apparently a kind of little bit of a trick, which is you always, before you show someone the house you want to sell them, you show them a less appropriate house, ideally that's slightly more expensive, say. So that when they see the house that you want to sell them, it's now clear cut because they can say, ooh, it's a bit cheaper than the other one and it's got a conservatory.
There's contrast.
So there's a kind of default effect, a bit like the famous economist experiment with the default effect. So, one of my interesting questions is, what interface will AI deploy to help us make choices? And will it make the mistakes that you could very easily make? If you think about it, nobody clicks the I'm feeling lucky button on Google. I think it's still there, and it's been there for years. And they've removed it and found that it slightly reduces the appeal. But the number of people who actually click, i.e. I'm feeling lucky, taken straight to a single page, is vanishingly small. People want to choose between, effectively above the fold options. And I'm just intrigued because it's very, very easy, I think, for people with an economic tech to make assumptions about what people are trying to do and how they choose, and that we're, utility maximizers and all this kind of thing. Only really to be completely wrong.
Do you think we're looking for efficiency in the wrong place?
We usually do, in the sense that when you pursue efficiency, generally you start looking at numerical or mechanical factors. And of course, in the process, you disregard psychological factors, where the greater gains may be found. And so you focus too heavily on cost reduction and too little on value creation. I mean, one of the greatest forms of efficiency, by the way, is employing a human being who's really, really nice. Now, this is complete anathema to people in tech who love to define business processes so as to make them susceptible to automation. Person X does this. We will take that function, we will replace it with algorithm Y. And it's a very beguiling message because it usually comes with cost savings attached. You might have heard of my thing, the Dorman fallacy. I'll remind the viewers and listeners, which is simply that, you have a hotel, it's a 5-star hotel, it has a doorman, someone who welcomes them and guests. A combination of, say, McKinsey or Accenture and a tech firm will come in and say, your doorman currently costs you X thousand dollars a year. We have defined his or her function as opening the door. We will replace the said doorman with automatic door opening mechanism and an infrared human detector, and we'll save you $30,000 a year. And then they walk away, they take the credit for the top thing. And then 2 years later, now it tells a catastrophe, the rack rates fall off the cliff, because the doorman was doing multiple things, many of which were human and kind of tacit. Security would be one. There are no agents to sleep on the door. Hailing taxis, dealing with luggage, recognizing regular guests, providing status to a hotel. There are loads and loads of value creation components to that doorman, which aren't captured in the open the door definition.
Is that an example of where the costs are really visible, but the benefits are invisible?
Correct, yeah. So it's very, very easy. Management consulting firms. If you're in a business and some management consultants come in, go to the management and say, are they on a gain share agreement? A gain share agreement is a management consulting scam where you claim a certain percentage of the cost savings you identify in year one. Now, as Roger L. Martin, your fellow Canadian and my own personal friend, any idiot can cut costs. Okay? What takes real skill is cutting costs away from the. One of the things that I don't think is understood by tech nerds, if I'm being really cool, males in general in many cases, is the extent to which in evaluating any business or experience, the human component of it, the face-to-face component, does really, really heavy lifting. I have a lovely story to illustrate this, which I think is fantastic. It's the absolute perfect example of misalignment of optimization through quantification bias. So wonderful man, Alex Batchelor, used to be the marketing director of Royal Mail, but similar to what you have with Canada Post, right? USPS. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, not yours, yes. And they couldn't make any sense of the fact that the brand perception of Royal Mail bore no relation to service levels. So there would be districts and areas where, every single first-class letter arrived early the following day, extraordinarily reliable levels of service, and Royal Mail wasn't particularly held in exceptional esteem. There are other areas where the service was frankly a bit ropey, and people seemed to love it. Now this obviously upset them, because they thought that all the billions, or certainly hundreds of millions they'd invested in service quality improvement should translate into customer satisfaction, and therefore, some sort of brand quality. And someone had a theory, and they said, I think something else is going on. And the theory, which was put to the test and proved absolutely right, was that the major determinant of whether you liked Royal Mail or not was whether you liked your postman, or posting, if you use the gender-neutral term. So people who had a rather unreliable service, but the postman did the odd favour for them, left things in the porch, had a chat with them, okay? Those people thought it was a brilliant organisation, regardless of the actual metrics that were being pursued. And I think that's very true in any service organisation. There's an electricity company, a gas company, a water company, a utility. You may interact with them online 95% of the time, but the one or two occasions where you interact by telephone or face-to-face disproportionately affect your perception of the organisation. And I've argued for some time, if I were being completely honest, I work in advertising, and if I were a wholly honest person without fear of annoying my colleagues, probably 50% of the time I would advise to a client, take 10 to 20% of your marketing budget and spend it on upgrading the call centre. Pay the people too much. Get the best practitioners. I think it's perfectly legitimate in some organisations. There should be the very best call centre people should be on 6 figures. Because it makes, if you're good and nice, that's how much difference it makes. In other words, it more or less drowns out all your other stuff, all the other noise. If every time you have a personal experience, you have a good experience, then broadly speaking in the human brain, that's a good organisation which I can trust. And when you think about it, I suddenly realise why this probably is. We don't really have much evolved experience in evaluating postal efficiency, do we? Okay? We have 500,000 years of evolved experience in deciding who to like and trust. Because for most of our evolutionary, existence, that was one of the five most important questions to get right. Do I trust this person? Will they attack me? Are they an ally? Are they a foe? If I pay them money, will they deliver? And so consequently, I think what we do in our brains is we use our human judgment as a proxy. Now, a story to back up that, you probably remember this, okay? It's in my book Alchemy, which is, imagine you're turning up to buy a second-hand car, and you turn up at the house, nondescript house, and the car's parked outside the house, and you have a looky-loo at the car, and you judge the, whether the pedals are worn and the condition of the bodywork, and you have a look around the car. And you decide you're interested in paying, let's say, $5,000 for this car. So you go and ring on the doorbell of the vendor, and the door is answered in one situation by, for example, a female vicar, okay? Could be Catholic, they can't be Catholic, but Episcopalian, doesn't really matter, okay? Female vicar, and it's a tidy, clean house. At that point, you probably upweight what you're prepared to pay by 20% or so. In a parallel universe, the door is answered by a guy in his underpants. In other words, someone with no shame. In that instance, you devalue the car, I suspect, by about $1,000 or more. In fact, you may not even buy it at all. And what we're doing here is we're effectively saying, what I'm going to do is a stand-in for the question, do I buy the car, which I don't have the technical knowledge to answer. I'm going to ask a supplementary heuristic question, which is, do I trust the person who's selling the car? And it's an interesting question. If my mother didn't know anything about cars, knew a lot about people, I think she would very reliably go around buying cars just through her assessment of the seller. And similarly, I think she might do better than someone with an engineering qualification who ignored who the seller was and their personality and character. Now, as a bit of evidence of this, I discovered, as I've been investigating this, various real estate agents have said to me that every estate agent does their utmost to make sure that until things are signed and sealed, the vendor never meets the buyer and vice versa. And the reason for that is if one of them doesn't like the other, they won't buy or sell. Now, when you think about it, that's completely, unless the person's moving next door. Obviously, if you're buying a house from someone who's planning to move next door and they turn out to be a psycho, that's relevant information. But it seems to be the case that if you meet the vendor and you basically don't trust them or think they're a bit shifty, it doesn't matter what the price is, it doesn't matter the condition of the house, suddenly you revise your valuation of the house downwards if you don't like the person selling it to you. And so that's one of the reasons why, apparently, real estate agents will leave any kind of contact between the two until after at least a survey's been done and enough commitments taken place. I once didn't buy a house, basically because the guy was being an arsehole about the fridge. Now, the fridge was only worth, I think 0.2% of the value of the house, or 0.02% of the value of the house, I can't quite remember. But because he was being a dick about the fridge, I no longer trusted him about the house. Weirdly, it turned out my instinct was right, because then a friend of ours went to buy the same house. They got some separate land registry search done and found out that a chunk of the garden actually belonged to Network Rail, not to the house. It effectively filched the last part of the garden.
So does that mean, I just want to go back to the real estate thing for a second, does that mean pretty or attractive real estate agents would be more successful than...
It's a really interesting question, which is, I think we ought to study these things more, because the assumption of an economist is that you need to disintermediate. You don't need estate agents, we just go on Zillow, or Rightmove in the UK, or whatever it is. What's the Canadian equivalent?
Oh, I don't even know.
Habits.com or whatever. Okay,
Realtor.com.
Yeah, exactly. You go on one of those things, you choose the house you want, you look at it, you then look at the house, get a survey done, buy the house. We assume that there is, this is a purely transactional exchange. Maybe in a rational world, that's exactly what it would be. But for one thing, actually, someone who's invested 15 years in doing up a house probably cares about what the person buying it is going to do to the house. So my parents-in-law, for example, are fanatical gardeners. Don't get into this, seriously, get some back to flat.
We have no worry that I'm going to...
Don't worry, you're going to become an enthusiast.
I can barely keep a plant alive.
Good, okay. But I guarantee, if you went and looked around their house and placed an offer while being an expert in botany and generally quoting people like Gertrude Jekyll and, prominent garden designers and Sissinghurst and da-da-da-da-da-da, you could buy their house for $200,000 net. But if you turned up and said, brilliant, we can knock down that tree and put in a helipad. I think you said we can knock down that tree and put in a karting track, right? I don't think they'd sell it to you at any price.
If you're a founder, you know naming your startup takes forever. You finally land on the perfect name, only to find out that Peter from Delaware got the document. So you're stuck with two bad options. Pay up and fund Peter's retirement, or tack on random words until your domain is like a Wi-Fi. But after all the time and money spent on naming, you don't want that. Thanks to .tech domains, you don't have to. With .tech, you get the name you actually want. It's clean, sharp, no compromise. It instantly tells investors and customers that you're building technology. CES.tech, the world's biggest consumer tech event, uses .tech domain. So does 1x.tech, an OpenAI-backed startup along with hundreds of thousands of tech companies worldwide. So don't waste another minute to go to GoDaddy, Namecheap, Cloudflare, or wherever you buy your domains and get your .tech domain today. The holidays are here. If you're searching for a truly meaningful gift for someone you care about, or maybe for yourself, I might just have the perfect idea. Meet Remarkable, the paper tablet. We're all glued to screens that demand our constant attention, but Remarkable is a different kind of screen. It's an elegantly designed, distraction-free paper tablet built to help you think better and focus deeper. It has the simplicity and feel of writing on paper, but with the power of technology like organizing all your notes and ideas into one place, and even converting your handwriting into typed text. With Remarkable, there are no apps, no social media, and no notifications, just pure, uninterrupted focus. Choose the device that fits your needs, the original black and white Remarkable 2, the advanced color display of Remarkable Paper Pro, and the new portable Remarkable Paper Pro Move. This holiday season, give the gift of being present. Give the gift of focus. Find the perfect distraction-free paper tablet at remarkable.com. Is that because people want to feel good about the transaction and feeling good is more than maximizing?
Richard Thaler did, I think, his most interesting work of all is actually on the concept of transaction utility, which you may remember. Do you remember this?
A little bit.
Yeah, I think it's in Nudge. And the famous thought experiment is this, which I find fascinating. And I think it's a really insightful thought experiment. So the idea is you and your best friend are lying on a beach somewhere, and it's hot, and you're very thirsty. And about a quarter of a mile down the beach, there's a place that sells ice cold beer. And your friend says to you, and he asks people to imagine this, your friend says to you, I'm off to blank to buy a beer. Tell me what the maximum amount you're happy to pay for a beer is. And if the price they quote falls below that threshold, okay, I will buy the beer, and if not, I won't. And he asked people to imagine what the threshold would be of what they'd pay for a beer on a hot day when they were parked on a beach for a cold beer. The beer is going to be consumed back where they're sitting. So the ambiance or, the clientele of the establishment selling the beer is irrelevant because you're not going to consume it. And the interesting thing is, in one situation, he says there is a boutique hotel selling chilled beer. And in the other situation, he says there's a shack selling cold beer.
And your price change.
And your readiness to pay changes partly in accordance to what you imagine to be the overheads of the establishment selling the goods.
Even though the
utility of the beer, as distinct from how good the transaction is, the actual utility of the cold beer is identical in both cases. I think that's Richard Thaler, and I think it's extraordinarily interesting because I think we can make car salesmen will know, make the transaction feel good, make them feel good when they drive out of the place.
That was scale teaming, right? People are more likely to buy from you if they like you. They're more likely to like you if they trust you, and you have something in common with them. And you can use all of these things to manipulate people. Unfortunately,
it's not manipulate. Be careful of that, because no. We've got to be really. I think we've got to be really careful here. One thing might be that a genuine cold-blooded psychopath
would intentionally.
I find it difficult. This is a Jeffrey Miller theory. That if you're on a first date, there's an element where, apparently, it's a long time, I've been married for 30-something years, but women on a first date will turn up a bit late or do something a little bit annoying. And Miller's theory is that it's a psychopath protection. So that if you...
Interesting.
So, one of the worst things that can happen to women is to get into a relationship with someone who's a psychopath, because you end up with an empty bank account and the sister's fire, but everything goes hopelessly wrong. Someone who's written very interestingly about this, by the way, is a fabulous woman who writes about education and absolutely brilliant. I'll remember her name in a second. But she's written quite about this, having a psychopath in the family. But likewise, Kevin Dutton has also written about this about his own father. There are certain things which you can do which make it very likely that psychopaths will out themselves. So the perfect test might be you bribe the waiter to tip soup on them, and they'll lose it. Or you turn up late, and someone like, assuming I'm not a psycho because you're Canadian, so, I default relatively low. You're too polite. You're too polite, exactly, yeah. It'd be too tiring to be a psychopath in Canada, wouldn't it?
Soup on me, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been sitting here.
I shouldn't have been here. I got in the way of your soup. The psychopath will lose his rag and can't control this. And likewise, if you turn up late, there's a chance they'll go, look, I've been sitting on my own like an idiot for 15 minutes. Whereas you and I would go, oh, no, I only just got here myself, the traffic's terrible. We don't fully know, you see, the value of what is going on in using a personal quality as a proxy for a decision which is simply too complicated to legalize or to reduce to numbers. Also, it is, I'll completely agree, in economic terms, it's suboptimal, but if it leads to downside variance reduction, which is what we're really trying to do, we're not trying to optimize, we're trying to reduce the risk of downside variance, and that's true in all sorts of things, investment strategy, etc. The barbell approach. First of all, make sure you don't do anything disastrous. Then after that, try and get lucky.
You say it like it's a conscious thing, but I think it's an unconscious because if it is conscious, it's probably a reverse signal that you're actually a bit off kilter. If you're consciously doing that.
In fairness, if you study social science matters, but I agree with you that my wife occasionally gets a bit annoyed with me because I will literally apply Taleb logic to decisions. Just to give an example, I always argue that over 36 years, holidays where I've rented a car are better than holidays where I haven't. And my argument is you have more optionality. See?
Interesting.
So if you rented a car and you find the hotel's a bit meh, or the hotel's not in a great area, you can just get in the car and go and find a beach somewhere else and go there every day. In other words, so I occasionally will deploy these kind of Taleb lines, and I'll also say, let's fly from so-and-so, because, it's the satisfices air.
You're the one who, I remember this, you said you should always fly from the smallest airport that's convenient for you. Is that it?
Oh, I'm a big, small airport thing person.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, it's kind of interesting, because airports are schizophrenic in a way, because the clientele of an airport is, roughly speaking, a 50-50 mix between people who fly a hell of a lot and just want to get through the damn thing as quickly as they can, and people who only fly once a year, who regard the trip to the airport as part of the holiday, and they love going through a shopping centre and looking at Hermes outlets or whatever. And so airports are effectively catering for two totally disparate groups of traveller.
And you can separate these people in the security line effectively.
You can, absolutely, you can separate them. And that's why, in a weird kind of way, I think you notice sometimes that the queue for the priority lane in security is longer than the queue for the amateur lane. But frequent business travellers will still join the priority lane on the assumption that the people in front of them are more competent. I mean, there's a George Clooney up in the air gag about that, right? And so it is very interesting, because is it irrational if it's a very reliable mechanism? So, all right, one example would be, I don't think it works very well nowadays, because there are enough posh civs around. But in the 19th century, if you were a posh and respected real estate agent, you had a lot of reputational skin in the game in the local community, both commercially, in people, so you were highly vulnerable to reputational damage, both commercially and also socially, because, a small town or would have been to a large extent a prestige economy. And therefore, dealing with the posh local estate agent rather than some guy who claims to be cheap is not irrational. The commission may be higher, whatever it may be, but in terms of reputational skin in the game as insurance against being, treated appallingly. But I think there's a kind of weird thing going on, which is that the job of the real estate agent is, to some extent, to be the person who stays behind in the place where the house is sold, to suffer the reputational consequences of anything outrageous, because the vendor of the house isn't really reputationally vulnerable if they're moving 300 miles away. And so some of the role of these intermediaries is just highly complicated. But when I say that, we fundamentally seem to attach very, very high weighting to, for example, a call center experience versus website design. I'm not suggesting for a second website design isn't really important.
It's almost like there's some experiences that are sort of additive or subtractive, and then there's some that are multiplicative. Like you can multiply by 0 or you can multiply by 10. Like a difference in that one particular factor.
There's a really interesting organization, I can't remember what they're called online, they call this a brand quake. A brand quake is where you do something, it could be resolving a problem really well. That would be a very good opportunity for a brand quake. The person has a problem, you put quite a lot of effort and intelligence into solving it very effectively for them. And then you ring them back to check that the problem has indeed been solved. Now that would be an example of something. I'll give you the perfect story of this. My father, who is half Scottish and without stereotyping anybody, he was quite parsimonious with what he bought generally. I mean, I'm not saying nothing. It's genetic, by the way. Just culturally, he was descended from long lines of Highland Scots who didn't get where they were today by splashing out. And he had, I think, when he died, he had 3 or 4 Dyson devices, which he'd bought from new in his home. He had one on each floor to save him carrying them upstairs. Now, these are, by any objective measure, pretty expensive spectacles. One of the reasons he was so fanatically loyal was that Dyson, now interestingly, I'm going to make a point here, which is a privately owned company, and do not underestimate the importance. PLCs or companies on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange are incentivized to behave like psychopaths, because they're optimized around short-term transactional value, not long-term relationship value.
I think maybe the generalization is that, like, if they're private companies led by a founder, then they're not run by the finance department. It's so interesting. I think about this a lot, where you have these short-term optimization and long-term effectiveness are two completely different
It's
things.
short-term money off versus long-term value on.
Yeah. And so there's always somebody making more money than you, but maybe they're cutting corners, maybe they're doing things that are unsustainable. And like you said, you can always save money in the short term, but do damage your brand. And
By the way, my theory is the primary reason for the success of these private companies, the secondary reason is they look after their consumers better, because they're effectively, unwittingly, they're practitioners in the customer value movement, not the shareholder value movement.
Well, Buffett had this saying where his directive, his letter, I guess, to all of his CEOs after he acquired the company was, the only expectation I have for you is to treat this company as if you and your family have 100% of your money in it for 100 years and you can't take it out.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that approach enables, even in a public company, that enables people to take long-term, do the thing that's
But
optimal.
actually, they do something. They look after their customers, and there is an interesting exception to this, probably, which is, for example, Costco, which actually Enterprise Rent-A-Car is family-owned, isn't it? Enterprise is family. And I've told everybody this, in the IPA Advertising Effectiveness Awards in the UK, my argument is that, with the exception of P&G, Diageo, Unilever, marketing-led companies, I don't think that PLC is what do you call them in publicly traded corporations. I don't think they can actually do marketing very well, because the requirement for short-term self-justification and numbers effectively overrides the real purpose of marketing, which is investment in long-term customer value.
I think this is why, generalizing a little bit, but this is why founders outperform. Even when they lead public corporations, they have the same pressures, the same analysts, the same...
But they also are considering posterity, aren't they? What is my legacy? I mean, it's interesting, actually. The German car industry, although they're public companies, are sort of family-run. Aldi, famously, which owns Trader Joe's, is basically owned by actually two German families. They had a huge feud. But two things going on there. One of the things they do is they look after their staff better. And I think when you look after your staff better, the customer notices.
Well, this is part of the Costco thing. So,
Yeah, Costco, exactly.
But that comes from the Saul Price line of thinking, which when he started FedMart, he sort of outlined the obligation of our business is we have a fiduciary relationship with the customer.
Yeah.
And Jim Sinegal, who founded Costco, was a student of Saul Price. And later on, they would merge the companies.
Of course they did, didn't they? Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? Where you treat your employees better.
There's my story from Dyson, which is family-owned. In fact, I think family-run companies, this would include people like S.C. Johnson, I think they should wear a badge. Do you see what I mean? Just as you have a kite mark on British...
Yeah.
Well, Loblaws is family-owned, isn't it? For example, in Canada. Family control. McCain, family control. So what I was saying about the Advertising Effectiveness Awards, 4 out of the 5 gold winners, it's only every 2 years, this award, and it's very, very rigorously judged. 4 out of the 5 winners, namely McCain, your Canadian heroes, McCain, Yorkshire Tea, Specsavers, and Laithwaites, a wine company. 4 out of the 5 winners. The 5th one was Guinness, which is sort of a family company in a sense, although it's owned by a Diageo. And so my point is that we should actually have a kite mark that allows consumers to prefer to buy from companies which aren't listed on some stock exchange somewhere and hence aren't controlled by the finance function because they're more trustworthy.
That's an interesting... I don't know if I agree with that, but it's interesting to...
Well, is Rogers still family controlled? I mean, Canada's actually packed full of...
Well, now
Canadian Tire, what about that?
increasingly you get family controlled, but not economically controlled. So you have like a dual cost.
The Western family would control Loblaws to some extent, even though they're not majority shareholder.
Well, I think if you have a corporation that's hundreds of billions and you control 10 or 15% of it, you effectively have control over that.
Yeah, Ford Motor Company falls into that definition. I think the family or there's a particular class of shares.
A lot of dual costs coming. But hold on, I want to go back to Dyson for a second. What makes Dyson so attractive at advertising?
Actually, it's not advertising, it's marketing, and it's customer experience.
What's the difference between marketing and advertising?
Advertising is a subordinate part of marketing, and in many cases, even I've worked in advertising for 36 years, I want to think of myself, probably unsuccessfully, but I still aspire to be a marketer, not an advertising person, because advertising is a useful toolkit available to the marketer, and by the way, generally is pretty effective. But Peter Drucker, the purpose of business is to find and keep a customer profitably. That's the purpose of marketing. It's to either create or find customers with whom, over time, you can engage in mutually advantageous relationships to mutual profit. That's it.
So what makes Dyson so good at marketing?
Well, the story I heard from someone who worked at Dyson for 12 years is that he was sitting in a presentation, James Dyson presiding, and they were presenting the call center sort of efficiency statistics. And by the way, I'm absolutely fanatical about call centers because I'm terrified that in an AI age, people will try and effectively automate them. I think what you should do instead is make them slightly smaller but a lot better. Because I don't think you can substitute for the human in cases of unusual problems, special circumstances, empathy, generally. Don't get me wrong, I think you can get AI empathy. I'm not suggesting that AI is going to be completely unempathic, but at some point it's rather like the equivalent of I want to speak to the manager. There will be situations where you want to speak to a person who can understand your specific situation and has the power to intervene to override the normal rules and regulations here to solve your problem, because it is commonsensical to do so. Even if, our service level agreement doesn't normally allow us to send out a replacement part. In this case, since your part is faulty,
Somebody who has the power to do the right thing.
Got it exactly. And I think, I think that will ultimately, you'll have to have the human as the last port of call on that. Also, your call center is the only way you can find out the problems that people can't solve anywhere else. Do you see what I mean? So there was a very smart person I met at Microsoft who, when they took over some fairly niche Microsoft product, they put the call center in the middle of the development team. I mean, I would argue that the call center of British Airways should be on the same floor as the boardroom, because it's where you find out where you're going wrong with your existing customers, who are the most important people.
You know, people talk a lot about product market fit, sales tactics, or pricing strategy, but the truth is success in selling often comes down to something much simpler, the system behind the sale. That's why I use and love ShopPay, because nobody does selling better than Shopify. They've built the #1 checkout on the planet, and with ShopPay, businesses see up to 50% higher conversions. That's not a rounding error, that's a game changer. Attention is scarce. Shopify helps you capture it and convert it. If you're building a serious business, your commerce platform needs to meet your customers wherever they are, on your site, in store, in their feed, or right inside their inbox. The less they think, the more they buy. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. If you're serious about selling, the tech behind the scenes matters as much as the product. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that I use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/knowledge project, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/knowledge project, upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/knowledge project. Are you struggling to manage your projects at work using lots of different tools for communication, task management, and scheduling? It doesn't have to be this hard. Basecamp is the refreshingly straightforward, reliable project management platform. It's designed for small and growing businesses, so there's none of the complexity you get with software designed for enterprises. The complexity kills momentum. Basecamp clears the path so your team can actually move. Do away with scattered emails, endless meetings, and missed deadlines. With Basecamp, everything lives in one place. To-do lists, message boards, chat conversations, scheduling, and documents. When information is scattered, attention is too. Basecamp brings both together. Basecamp's intuitive design ensures that everyone knows what's happening, who's responsible, and what's coming next. My head of operations swears by this platform and is the first person to suggest it to anyone. If you need another decorated referral, you should call her. Whether you're a small team or a growing business, Basecamp scales with you. Stop struggling, start making progress, and get somewhere with Basecamp. Sign up for free at basecamp.com.
The map territory problem, right? So often the businesses are run by the map, which is like the spreadsheets, the volumes, the wait times, the whatever, but the territory is the customer calling in. And the problem...
That's cool, isn't it? The map is not the territory.
Yeah, that they're experiencing. And so if you're not touching reality, you can get distorted by the map.
But I want to go back. You said you follow exactly the same thing Dan Davis did, which is one huge advantage of being a customer value company, not a shareholder value company, is that customers live in the real world. And therefore you are actually rooted in reality. Whereas shareholders, by the way, not share owners, but the shareholders are principally interested in justifying their own existence to their investors. And therefore they're dealing with a highly artificial construct in terms of defining the value of the customer.
But I think what's best for the shareholders is what's best for the customer. It's just the timeline mismatch that people have. So if your timeline for...
Well, it's incoherent, by the way. The shareholder value movement is totally incoherent, because over what time frame, which shareholder, what are you optimizing for? It's completely incoherent nonsense, which is very, very friendly to stock market analysts who want a ready supply of quarterly data so they can bullshit their way out of things. How valuable it is to people with pensions is a completely separate matter. Because one of the things it does is it prevents companies from innovating effectively, and it prevents them from investing properly in customer relationships.
Okay, come back to Dyson. We're telling me this story. Somebody had worked there for 12 years.
So they were going blah, 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 average call time, blah, 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 average wait time. And it was the standard kind of call center metrics about how quickly can we get these people. I mean, it's a bit more sophisticated than that, you know. I'm sure there's some measure of satisfaction. But it was kind of evaluating the call center on an operational efficiency standpoint. And Dyson basically said, stop right now. You've got this all wrong. The way we should look at this is we should treat it as an honor if one of our customers chooses to get in touch with us, and we should therefore respond to them accordingly. As if we're flattered by the contact, not as if we're bothered by the interruption. Or words to that effect. I'm putting words in his mouth, but this is roughly speaking what the person said happened in the meeting.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean,
and by the way, that's why my father had 4 Dysons. What finishing man though he was, I hope he was, he said he was my late father, but every time he rang them up, which might have been only once every year, they did something astonishing. And they were really, really helpful, and they solved the problem, and the part arrived the next day. Sometimes they didn't even charge for the replacement part, and therefore he completely trusted those people, and therefore was willing to pay an enormous premium, really, over other vacuum cleaners which might have had the same notional, effect on us, precisely because of that trust.
There's so much opportunity here, right? If you think of you competing in a world where we're moving to AI-driven call centers, if I took the exact opposite approach, which is
a really, really good service organization allows for very streamlined, efficient service for people who know exactly what they want. and extremely empathetic service for people who are undecided, uncertain, or find themselves in an unusual situation. Okay, you need to do both. And that's where I think the tech bros have got it all wrong, because they see the opportunity of tech as being a one-way street towards ever greater efficiency, streamlining. And let's face it, tech bros are not neurotypical in terms of what they want. When you allow tech bros too much power over decision-making, along with their running dog lackeys in kind of management consultants, you're optimizing for something that may be very, very distant from what your real-world customers really care about.
You're using tech pros as like a...
No. It's perfectly reasonable to say that the people who work in this field are not representative of the whole human population. And that's a reasonable assertion.
What is it you're representing when you say tech pro, though?
Anybody in a tech industry, just as anybody in advertising, myself included, is overweighted towards the belief in the ability of advertising to solve these problems. And I will freely admit that I am guilty as charged. However, ad people don't get that much opportunity to convince other people of the rightness of their argument. What has happened is that in marketing, for example, the tech companies, the consulting firms that sell stacks, and I owe a lot of this to a guy called Adel Borki, very interesting self-taught Libyan marketing writer, former boxer. Adel Borki, I coined the phrase technoplasmosis, by analogy with toxoplasmosis, which is tech people and consultants have taken over the finance department, so that the marketing metrics the finance department has faith in and demands from marketing are not those metrics which are most conducive to building brand and customer value over time. They're the metrics which are most conducive to selling tech solutions to the company.
What are the metrics that are most...
Well, it's all about short-term transactional, bottom of the funnel, quick to, how can you shovel money to Meta in a slightly more efficient way. It's not about long-term value creation at all. Right? Now, don't get me wrong, all that bottom of the funnel, short-term transactional stuff is very important to get right. I'm not disparaging, but it's only a third of the game.
Right.
And they're not interested in the other two-thirds of the game because they don't make money if someone spends money on their call center or upgrades their call center staff or allows the call center staff to call out.
It's sort of like cybersecurity. It's seen as the cost. It's a cost.
Yeah. I mean, Bonnie Blue would do really well in this because she's all about the numbers, not about the quality of the relationship. Funny enough, she did work in NHS finance procurement, ironically. Well, finance recruitment. She recruited people for the National Health Service finance. So her approach to sex was merely an extrapolation of what she learned, I think, recruiting finance people for the National Health Service. All about the quantity, not about the value creation, the relationship.
I like this quantification bias thinking.
I mean, Buffett, okay, you're quite rightly your hero, he was obsessed with the quality of the management of companies with whom he invested, wasn't he?
I'm
obsessed with personal factors.
I've read a lot I think, I'm going to give a nuanced answer here. I don't know the answer, so I'll preface that with that. I did read a lot about what he used to do in the 60s, and he was a tireless private investigator. And what he was trying to determine, I don't think it was anything about the person other than does what they say line up with who they are. And if the answer is yes, I can deal with that because I know what to expect. And if the answer is no, if they can't go to work and claim to be a penny pincher, because if they go to work and say they're going to cut costs, they're driving around with a Ferrari or whatever, like this is a thing that it doesn't line up. And so I feel like he was always just trying to assess the predictability of people. If that makes sense.
In other words, by looking at their consistency.
Did the management of life do what they said they were going to do? The balance sheet changes over, he had a different emphasis on things than people, I think, realize. And I think with a lot of his investments, my personal take is he was looking for predictability. And it wasn't about massive disruption. It was never about things being turned around. He got out of that in the late 60s. With diversified retailing, was the last real turnaround situation they sort of got themselves into. They exited quickly.
They got burned. Did they quite?
Well, they didn't really get burned, but I was talking to Munger about this over dinner one day, and he's like, we just realized that we made a mistake. We were never going to make a lot of money in this business, and it was highly competitive, and we had no edge, and so they got out as quickly as they could. And I think that the predictability of what he buys, at least as long-term holdings, like if you look at that, I think it's really interesting because it's like, you can kind of see it, the railroad. We're going to be using the railroad in 50 years. That's a great example.
It would be unbelievably difficult to build a complete one.
But you can lever it if it's predictable. And leverage is this interesting thing where he says they don't do a lot. And they don't when you look at the whole company. But on the railroad, for instance, they'll put a decent amount of debt in the railroad. Because they know the earnings, it's very predictable.
And they're comfortable.
The same as the energy, where they're putting a lot of capital. They put a lot of debt in. And I talked to this guy in Nova Scotia, Tom Bragg. And he did the same thing. And so he created Oxford Frozen Foods. He's this incredible story. He's this billionaire from this small town of 1,100 people. He started,
I think in Nova Scotia. What's it called?
Oxford.
It's called Oxford, Nova Scotia.
And he started not one, not two, but three multi-billion-dollar companies with a small town of 1,100 people.
Is he still there?
He's still there. Yeah,
Oh, I like that.
that's a great guy. And it was fascinating to talk to him because he basically was like, look, he owns North America's largest private telecommunications company. And he said, I wasn't afraid of debt at all. And we levered up massively. We went all in multiple times, acquiring more assets.
But if there's something more volatile, he gets very nervous about the debt.
So he wouldn't do it if there was volatility, but he also had this thing where it was so counterintuitive to what you hear on Wall Street, which is like, I don't mind paying more. I don't mind paying the most. And I was like, really, that surprises me. And he's like, well, a lot of these things only come up once. I don't get another shot at it. And if I'm a private company, I don't have public company shareholders, and it takes me, 5 years versus 3 years to get my money back out of the deal, why do I care? I'm never going to be offered this again, and they're not going to build another one.
No.
So when it comes to fiber optic in the ground, he's like, it's getting harder and harder to
What
do.
is this company? Is the Canadian company in telecoms?
It's Eastlink Cable Communications.
I've heard, yeah.
And so not only do they deliver cable to a large portion of Canada, they own a lot of infrastructure that people aren't aware of. And he said, well, what difference does it make? And I've been chewing on that nugget ever since. And, you can apply this from a marketing perspective as well, right? If you have a client, or go back to real estate for a sec, you have a client who's looking at a lake house or a cabin or a cottage or whatever you call them in the UK or in the United States, and you get a property and you say, my budget is, I don't know, say 500,000, and you find a property that's $7 million, and is it worth splurging on the $700,000 property or whatever it is? And the answer is this like a once in a generation property that I'm never going to have the shot at again? And if you can frame things,
It's also much more likely to be scarce.
yeah,
The rarer you get, generally.
and then you make overpaying seem rational. And in a way, it kind of is rational, where it's like, well, this is only going to come up once. So like, I have a friend actually going through this now. They're looking at buying a family cottage. And I'm like, how do you think about these things? He's like, oh, I saw this one. It was perfect, but it was a little more money than, and I brought this up.
Having a cottage on a lake on which yours is the only cottage is the kind of gold standard for Canadian property.
That would be the dream.
Have a lot of lakes.
Yes.
So, but I'd always heard that as a kind of...
But it's sort of like, what do you want? If you want a second property, you want proximity, so it's easy to get to. You want privacy, so there's not a lot of things around it. And these things just don't come up very often. As many lakes as we have, I mean, the prime properties come up maybe once every 5 or 6 years per lake. And
as Kane said, in the long term, we're all dead.
we're all dead. So anyway, an interesting aside here, but when we sat down, we were talking about high trust versus low trust societies and introducing friction. Yeah, I'm wondering, spend a beat on that for a second.
Well, I met someone you must interview, by the way, called Philip K. Howard, who's written various books called Life Without Lawyers. He's just written a book which is coming out right now called, I think it's Can Do, which is restoring the spirit of American can do. And he argues that a large part of economic decline and social malaise has come from the